Although sickness in the workplace is not uncommon, the strict guidelines in place to reduce transmission of COVID-19 and constant news updates on the spread of the disease can make people hyper-aware and even suspicious of their co-workers' health. The alarming rate of infections could potentially provoke social stigma against anyone perceived to have been in contact with the virus or who shows some of the symptoms, even if they are not infected. Now, to discuss this further, we are joined by employment relations expert and lecturer at the University of Stellenbosch Business School, Gawie Cillie. Gawie, thank you so much for your time. Now, the coronavirus has been with us for roughly 8 months now. And while some sectors of society are only now returning to work, people are still very wary of the virus. How do workplaces minimize the stigma associated with an employee contracting COVID-19?
To be able to properly manage the issue of social stigma and or bullying, we need to understand where this actually originates from. The reason why we're dealing with social stigma associated with COVID-19 is simply because the disease is new. There's still, for which there are still many unknowns. It's also because of the unknown, something that we fear, and therefore this fear is then projected onto others that might be infected by COVID-19, and that's where the bullying actually comes in. So from a managerial perspective, our best efforts should be focused on how can we actually manage bullying rather than trying to look for or invent something that might prevent it from happening in the workplace. It's going to be very difficult, if not impossible, to prevent it from happening, but surely from a managerial perspective, there's a couple of interventions that we might consider. For example, I think our focus should be on how do we create a psychologically safe workplace culture where employees could actually feel free to raise their concerns should they feel they either being bullied or they being unfairly treated because of their COVID-19 status. And that might boil down to a number of interventions. I think we should start developing a people-friendly language to talk more positively about the recovery rate, people that have recovered. We should refrain from using negatives like talking about statistics or victims. More inclusive language, and we could also ensure that from a managerial perspective we encourage our managers to frequently engage with our employees, especially those that are working remotely, to check in regularly on their well-being, also to engage those that are at the workplace, to engage them on the safety protocols that are in place, and then to ensure that we have policies and procedures in place that allows employees to raise their concerns, as I've indicated earlier, with management to enable the parties to discuss these concerns. And also, very, very importantly, the employer must communicate his stance on the matter. He must communicate quite clearly to employees that bullying in the workplace is a form of misconduct and therefore unacceptable.
Now, Gawie, what exactly does the Labour Relations Act say about bullying in the workplace? As you rightfully said, bullying has been happening for many years, and it's a power dynamic of sort where the employer, who is your senior manager, is bullying the employee to do certain things. What does the law say?
Labour legislation in South Africa is silent on the matter. We do not have specific labour legislation in South Africa that deals specifically with bullying. For example, in a country like Australia, you would find legislation that deals with bullying. The best we can do in South Africa is to refer to the Employment Equity Act, which contains a provision on harassment. So if we make out an argument that bullying is a form of harassment is a form of unfair discrimination, that should be the legal avenue that would be available to employees that feel that they have been bullied.
Now, the work of HR practitioners is going to become even more important in this current climate then. What are the types of policies you've mentioned earlier that should be established to enable employees to work in an environment which is free from harassment?
I think the first important point to remember is that whatever policies are put in place must contain a clear statement regarding the employer's stance on bullying. Secondly, policies must contain clear communication channels for employees. So, for example, if I feel that I've been bullied, where do I actually go to? Clear procedures, communication channels on how to deal with this, and then also a guarantee, if I can use the word, to employees that nobody will be victimized if they raise their concerns about bullying. It is a serious problem because it negatively impacts on employees' performance.
If I can borrow from the current cliche of a new normal, we know that COVID-19 has shown us that there are so many things that we could be doing differently. So what are the lessons here about corporate bullying that we can learn, given the fact that people are now working remotely and are not necessarily in the office often?
The sad thing, Yolanda, is that we should actually, in 2020, be in a far better position to deal with bullying than the way we are currently dealing with it. And the reason why I'm saying that is because many years ago, when we started to become aware of HIV and AIDS, there was a lot of bullying taking place. There was a lot of stigmatization that took place. So one would expect that we actually in a better place to be able to effectively deal with it. Unfortunately, that does not seem to be the case, which once again reflects maybe on the poor quality in terms of trust between employers and employees in South Africa. To emphasize this point, I want to share a statistic with your viewers. A recent statistic that was made available by the CCMA, that's the body that's dealing with disputes between employers and employees in South Africa, indicated that between, roughly speaking, the end of March and the middle of June, 278 referrals were received by the CCMA for alleged unfair dismissals by employees. Now, those clearly indicate the mindset or the frame that we're dealing with some employers in South Africa, where a large number of employees are being dismissed simply because they're COVID-19 positive.
Now, Gawie, you're also a relationships expert. What are some of the effects that corporate bullying leaves one, especially the one that is being bullied at the time?
Unfortunately, a very serious negative impact. The part that is impacted is the trust relationship between employers and employees. It's a harsh reality that South Africa, in terms of the rest of the world, is very low on this trust scale in terms of the level of cooperativeness or adversarialism between the parties in the workplace. So we need to be extremely mindful that the better we manage bullying in the workplace and to limit it to an absolute minimum, the greater the trust levels will be in the workplace. We must also remember that working remotely, as you've indicated, could also negatively impact on trust in the employment relationship, because those employees are further away from the workplace and they do definitely have concerns around their job security.